In my efforts to make a comprehensive guide to M7, which will be uploaded eventually, probably, I've had to objectively consider a lot of different strategies, some of which straight up deserve their own videos. Today, we're going to talk about a strategy that I've given its own standalone video because I need money, but also because it's a new strategy that looks very promising, especially for lower level archers who struggle to do damage. This video has been split up into 3 sections. In the first section, we talk about what the strategy is, where it's probably useful, and how some of the M7 community has been reacting. In the second section, I perform a complete analysis of the strategy over a dataset consisting of 5 semi-randomly selected Kata 50s given the 2 possible scenarios. In the third section, I explain what the results of my analysis mean in the context of all M7 instead of just Kata 50s, and I also discuss possible uses outside of M7 entirely. As always, I want to give a shout out to everyone on screen right now for just helping out with this video, and let's get right into it. So recently, Just Eberos, I think that's how it's pronounced, he found a strat where you use Boomerang to increase your rapid fire damage by a ton. He uploaded a short video of it to YouTube, and he's given me permission to use some of the clips from his video, so thank you to him. Basically, after placing Relic, you throw your Boomerang at a husk to kill it and get Soul Eater, then when it's returning, you use Edible Mace. Bone does double damage on return, and Mace doubles damage again, so you can get really high damage crits like this. The Archer ult Rapid Fire shoots 5 arrows per second, dealing 75% of your highest hit within the last minute. So basically, you can get a huge crit with Bone, then you use Rapid Fire on the first dragon. You can only use it on one dragon because of the long cooldown, but this is all you need because the first dragon is the hardest. In M7, you want to do what's called splitting on the first spawn. Arch, Heal, and Tank go to one dragon, while Burst and Mage go to the other. The goal is to skip both dragons instead of just one, making P5 go faster. Also, when Purple's first spawn, only Tank goes with Arch. Lots of parties struggle with splitting, especially on low power, so being able to do more damage on first spawn has the capacity to really speed up the average M7 player's run speed and split consistency. Now, the Garbage Fire, I mean M7, yes, has kind of liked the idea, but a lot of my friends haven't. 15H says it doesn't save time, and you would assume it will be used for world record if it saved time. And while it is true that killing your split drag faster doesn't save time because the third drag still spawns at a set time, other people like Nash's argue splitting is very much an issue for P-Finder, and this is a strat for P-Finder, not for world record parties. I personally argue that this strat could even be used for Derpy, which coincidentally starts the day I'm uploading this, so I think it's worth to take a closer look. Now, to figure out how good it actually is, there's 2 specific scenarios we need to look at. The first is if you do everything correctly, meaning you place your relic and then you hit your bone and mace swap. It's important to clarify that you have to hit it after placing your relic. If you do it before, then you're slowing down the run. There's an argument to be made that you waste less time than you lose due to skipping, but this strat only increases the probability of skipping and only for low power. On high power, it's pointless because skipping faster actually doesn't save time because the third dragon will always spawn at a set time. So you never want to do this before placing a relic, only after. And a lot of lower level players are not as good at the game, which isn't me being mean, it's just saying they haven't played as much yet, which is perfectly fine. However, it does mean we have to account for the possibility of missing our bone swap. What happens if you fail to hit it before drag spawn? Well, if you miss, you have a choice. You could try doing it as drags are spawning, but then you wouldn't really be able to arrow stack because it takes a while to charge up your arrow stack, and you'd also have to clear the mobs, and you can't really do all this while still getting the bone swap down if you miss it after placing relic. The other possibility is that you just don't go for bone at all and you only arrow stack. I will be considering both possibilities using data values given to me by 5 Kata 50s. One of them I asked directly because he has good stats. One DM'd me something unrelated and I asked him because why not? One I pinged in a server to give me stats because he pinged me about something unrelated. And 2 more DM'd me their own stats after I asked for help in a random server. You can guess who's who, but it doesn't really matter because I've given all of them credit anyways. So now we need to move on to the actual analysis, also known as... So let's start off by comparing not arrow stacking and not bone swapping. We'll start simple with this function I have. So this function is yeah, I don't actually know what it is, but I do know 2 things about it. One, it does not account for gravity, so cry about it or something. Second, the integral of this is going to give us arrow stacking. Now, anyone who's taken calculus before is having one of 2 reactions to realizing that we need to integrate this. The first one is crying, which is valid, but it's not quite what I'm looking for. The second one is thinking that this can't even be integrated, and I would agree with that. I don't think this integral can be expressed in terms of elementary functions. Maybe someone who's better than me at math can find an analytical solution, but let me remind you guys, this is a Minecraft YouTube video, so you were approximating. I chose to use a Taylor polynomial about the point approximately equal to 0.6 to approximate this. because I can, and I used a 6th degree polynomial because Wolfram Alpha wouldn't integrate the 7th degree one properly. Wolfram also wouldn't tell me the error in this approximation over the interval 0 to delta t, but using Desmos, I found the maximum error of this approximation to be about plus or minus 0.053, sorry, my bad, which is very reasonable for a skyblock calculation. Now, the integral from a to b, with this interval being a proper subset of non-negative reals, gives us the arrow stacking multiplier on this interval. For our purposes, we want to consider our interval a to b as a subset of 0 to x naught over 22.4, because you run 22.4 blocks per second. We will actually be considering 4 different endpoints for our interval, so I'm going to define this integral as a new function g of a new variable. Wait, I already used all the variables in the math leading up to this. Wait, nope, hold up. I can figure this out. Let's find a new variable. Greek alphabet. Let's use xi. So g of xi is going to be equal to this integral, which is going to be approximately equal to the integral of our Taylor polynomial given here. Before we can solve this, we need to plug in x0 and y0 values, which are simply our horizontal and vertical distance from drag spawn respectively. Now, I actually only used one variable to account for horizontal distance, even though Minecraft has both x and z coordinates for horizontal distance. This was just to decrease the number of variables because you can find x0 very easily with the distance formula, or literally any of 3,000 other ways. I have a table of values for some pretty decent arrow stacking spots, so I chose blue dragon so the approximation would be the most accurate, took these values for x0 and y0 and plugged them in. The integral of the Taylor polynomial then comes out to this function. I added 1 to the integral to make it actually give the scale factor instead of being equal to 0 at the beginning, because this is how scale factors work. So we want to evaluate this for these 4 values of xi, which are all included in our original maximum interval 0 to delta t. We actually consider the maximum of this interval to be a function of the minimum of x0 and delta x values, where delta x is the distance we run instead of the straight up distance to the dragon. We find that this interval goes to about 1.23, and clearly 1.2 is less than this. All these values are pretty representative of actual parties. Top parties get 0.3 and 0.6 seconds, while a lot of lower level parties get 0.6, 0.9, and 1.2 second kills. We find that the integrals come out to these values. Now we have the scale factors for arrow stacking over a certain time interval, so let's consider the scale factor for using bone over term and not arrow stacking. To do this, we take the damage per second using bone swap divided by the damage per second using term rapid fire, given as r equals dagger sub beta over dagger sub tau. Because yes, I used that many variables in the math leading up to this, that dagger is a variable. And yes, the dagger is a variable, it's not denoting the Hermitian conjugate. Anyways, the math is kind of boring here, it's just multiplying even more variables, but I did the math for 5 people who gave me numbers for a maxed bone, 3-man legion, and an E-drag pet, because you would have an E-drag on before the drag spawns, not a G-drag. This gave me these multipliers, which are all lower than even the lowest scale value for arrow stacking. So arrow stacking is obviously more important than this bone strategy. Now, if we consider what happens when bone swap is done right, it's the exact same calculation actually, because we just still want the scale factor for bone over term, except now I'm going to give G dagger sub gamma and double dagger sub G to indicate G drag values instead of E drag values. We're going to get an average multiplier of about 1.5x. Now, all of that is great unless you don't understand it at all, which is very possible because it is honestly pretty confusing. So let's clarify what all this actually means. So if you do the swap correctly, you get about a 1.5x damage multiplier, which is pretty good. If you don't do it correctly, then you get about a 1.3x multiplier because you have to use E-drag. And this is going to be worse than arrow stacking always. This means that if you miss your bone swap after placing relics, you just shouldn't do it at all, and you should just arrow stack instead. Even if you use G-drag then rod swap or something, this is only better than arrow stacking if you killed the dragon in basically a third of a second, and anyone who can do that doesn't need to go through the effort of doing this strat just for splitting, because again, killing the dragon faster on split does not make the run faster. You just need to kill them, doesn't matter how fast. This fact allows us to consider where the strat is useful at all. A lot of P-Finder archers struggle with splitting, especially on low power, so this strat can be used by P-Finder archers to lower the average power blessing they can split on for a relatively low cost, because again, when it's done right, it's literally just free 1.5x damage. For high power, you don't really need to do it because you can already split on that power, but it's going to be nice for a lot of P-Finder on lower power. It'll also be helpful for players just getting into M7 who aren't even skipping consistently, since it'll make at least one of their dragons easier to skip. For those just learning how to split, it can also help them out by making splitting easier. This is overall a really good strat for lower level M7 players and a pretty decent one for mid-level players. At the top level, it's pretty unnecessary since splitting is already consistent on pretty much all powers. You might think it would help with world record runs at least, since you can auto clear more rooms and still still split, but they already clear faster than blood on any map, so it's not even useful there. I think it'll be a really good strat for Derpy though, and luckily bones can be crafted and upgraded with only bizarre materials, so those of you watching during Derpy can pick one up right now in fact. This should make skipping and maybe even splitting easier for all M7 players during Derpy. I'm not quite sure where this would be useful outside of M7. You would probably have to use the bone during clear to get a high crit, since most bosses either don't spawn mobs or those mobs have damage reduction and defense values. This could be nice in M1, maybe M5, and maybe the starting phases for M2 and M3. I think this will also be pretty good for M6, but for a different reason. Explo shot is very nice for Terras, and it also scales with your highest bow hit in the last minute. Also, if you hit a bone within like 5 or 10 seconds of entering the portal, you can get bone swap rapid fire on giants too, but this one really isn't as helpful. Explo shot is more helpful in my opinion. And again, this is all just free damage, completely free damage. The only downside is the cost of the boomerang, and most players will be fine with like a 5-star power 6 bone and a clean edible mace. And M7 players who care probably have the money for 10 stars and maybe even power 7. And in return, you get free damage. Like, it's literally just free damage. Anyways, that's about it. Shout out again to Just Eberos for discovering the strat, and hopefully I see you guys again before December ends. Although, no promises. You guys know how I am with deadlines.